This is part 7 of our potato grow along, and today we are going to be looking at harvesting and how to store our main crop potatoes. So I've harvested these a few days ago, and we will look at how I've done that and how to make that a little bit easier for yourself, particularly if you're growing in buckets. And then I've started curing them. This is one of the potatoes that have come out of there that we've grown in the bucket. And then this is the same variety, but actually hasn't been stored in the ground for as long. So it hasn't been allowed to completely die back before I've harvested it. And you can really see the difference in the colour. And that isn't to do with anything except for the fact that the skin on this one is going to be tougher where we've allowed it to completely die back. And then this one, if I was to scrub it with a little potato brush, the skin would fall off a lot easier. So part of the process of when we cure any of them, where we allow them to completely dry out, and we never want to wash them before we do this because that's going to stop them storing as long. But by allowing these potatoes to completely die back, we get a much thicker skin that is going to store for us a lot better than it would otherwise. Ideally, we would have a room in the house where we can put each of these potatoes laid out on a table in a dark space. And then we can just allow them to make sure that they are completely cured. And this would also then make sure that they're not touching each other in order to store them for as long as possible. But in reality, for the majority of us, this isn't something that we can do, and we're going to instead be looking at storing them in sacks. So this is the sacks that I'm looking at putting mine into today. These are the ones that I've had my early potatoes in. I've got a few of those left, but they're going to be moved over now to become seed potatoes. And I'll do a video about how we can save those a little bit later. So these sacks have a double skin to make sure that absolutely no light can penetrate to the potatoes. It's really important that they don't have light penetrating them and they don't start going green, because then we won't be able to eat them. If your potatoes have gone green in storage and you're going to plant them, then that's absolutely fine. They're still safe to plant, but they're not safe to eat. And then if you look online, you will also find Hessian sacks that are designed for exactly the same use. Wherever we store these need to be in a cooler room with hopefully as little fluctuation in temperature as possible. These are the potatoes that we want to store now until our first and second early potatoes are going to take over. So these will store longer than the other ones. Once we've removed them from the ground or the bucket that we've been growing them in, the next stage is going to be to either lay them out on a dry day on top of the soil, and you can pop a cover over them just to make sure that no moisture or anything gets to them, and allow the sun just to dry them out a little bit. Or you can pop them into a basket like I've done and then pop a cover over the top. So we've just used a old quilt cover that's folded over quite a few times, and they've just rested on our kitchen table for a few days. If you've got more than one layer of the potatoes, you are going to want to make sure that you turn them, space them out, and make sure that they are completely dry before they go into the sack. The other thing that's really, really important to make sure that we do is to actually check each of these potatoes and make sure that there's none that are going into the sack that are damaged. The ones that are damaged you can use sooner, and then the ones that aren't damaged are going to store for the longest period. This year, with this very wet weather, we've had a huge amount of potatoes that have come out of the bucket of these main crops, but actually a huge amount of them was also damaged, and a lot more than I would normally expect. Out of the entire bucket, I might normally find maybe 4 that have had a little bit of nibbling from some slugs or some wireworm or something like that, but actually about half of them this time have been damaged. So if you have got some in that you want to check on and you want to do this before they completely die back, then I would encourage you to do that. And the other buckets that I've got are just starting to die back at the moment. So as we use these ones, I may well harvest them a little bit sooner. And this is not something that I normally find or have found in any other year. I think it is just that the slugs have been so rampant this year. Okay, so we've got a decent amount of potatoes out of that bucket. Now what I need to do is start actually checking over these and seeing any that are damaged to remove from here and to be used quicker. So that's got a little bit of a scab there, so I'm going to pop that one in to be used quicker. And I'm just sort of rubbing some of this mud off so I can make sure that I can see properly. This of course is just 1 bucket's worth of potatoes, so hopefully we'll have a reasonable amount out of all of them once they're all ready. If you find any raised bumpy areas like these, then you might have a little bit of scabbing. This is something that can happen usually, I believe, from when they're grown a little bit too close together. So if you've had a really good harvest, then it's possible that you're going to have scabbing, or if you've not spaced them out well enough in the ground. It's not something to worry about, although it doesn't look overly pretty. It is something that can simply be peeled off and then used as you would have before. So these are the King Edwards here that we've taken out of the bucket, and then the few lighter ones are ones that have come out of a different area, and then these ones at the back are actually ones that I've grown in straw this year just to see how they've done. So they've all been very well dried now for a good few days, and they are ready to start going into their sack. This is the sack that I've had the earlier potatoes in, so I'm just going to remove the last few out of here. These are going to become my seed potatoes, and then I'm going to refill these with our main crops. So next we're going to put these main crops into the sack now in order to store them in a cooler area of our house. And these ones actually do have a little bit of damage still. So as I said, a lot of this crop were actually damaged. So I will be keeping a closer eye on these. Usually I would manage to store them for a couple of months before I start taking them out every sort of 2 weeks and starting to check that there aren't any that are rotting in the bag. You may find that putting them into a smaller batch at a time, so if I'd harvested all of my 6 buckets currently, then I would definitely be putting these into more than one bag, just to make sure that if there is one that rots in there and I miss it, that it doesn't then cause the others to rot as well. So just remove any mud just by rubbing it over if you haven't done so already, and then they should just pop straight into the bag for storing. These smaller ones I'm just going to pop into another one of the smaller bags like I have, just like I've just popped those other ones in, just because it's easier than having them all at the bottom to sort through them. And then I'm just going to relabel these so I know what's in the bag. I also tend to write down whether it's a main crop or an early, because it's sometimes difficult to find that out again. So if you are using any of your potatoes for seed potatoes, that can definitely help. I hope this grow along has given you a bit of an insight of how easy it is using the different varieties, the earlies, second earlies and the main crops, to have potatoes ready and stored for all of the year. Our first earlies give us a really quick crop, and then our second earlies give us a crop that is going to store well enough until our main crops are ready. And then the main crops, giving the correct care, can stay very well in the bag for months and be ready then until our early potatoes are ready again for us. If you haven't got too much damage to the potatoes that you have in the buckets, don't forget you can also then take those buckets and pop them into a shed or an outbuilding to continue them storing within the soil that they're in. But I would make sure that you do check that the pest damage isn't too much on one of the buckets before you do this, because obviously the pests are still going to be in the soil and will still be munching on them. So if you leave them in there for months, then you might end up losing some of your potatoes. Wherever you do store them, make sure that they are away from any mice or any rats if they are in an outbuilding or a garage or a shed, because they will find them and have a lovely munch on them as well. And the other thing to consider is if they're not under the ground, where they would be protected from the majority of the frost that we have in the UK, then any potatoes that are stored in the outbuilding will go completely mushy if they are frozen. So don't let them have any frost damage. If you are finding that the potatoes that you've dug up have got a lot of damage to them, then one option would be to make them into mashed potato and store them in the freezer. potatoes can't be frozen raw, but they can be parboiled or turned into mash and then frozen in the freezer from there. Don't forget to keep an eye out for a video of using these potatoes now as seed potatoes for us next year as well.